Welcome back to The Critique. We're here to help you maximize the impact of your work.
And this is, I have to say, exceptionally strong material.
It really is. So this analysis covers how the 2025 collapse of Ayande Bank, which was, driven by regime affiliate corruption, became the catalyst that exposed Iran's deep economic decay and sparked these unprecedented protests.
It really captures a pivotal moment. The goal here seems to be taking it from a chronicle of events to an inescapable argument about systemic failure.
Right, so let's dive in. The material makes a powerful case that the bank's collapse was a breaking point, but I think the specific analytical mechanism linking this financial failure to the shift in the protest demographics, well, that needs stronger establishment.
Okay.
The notes lay it out. The crisis leads to massive money printing to cover a, $5 billion debt.
A huge sum.
Which then causes the rial to lose 84% of its value in 2025 alone. And this, in turn, fuels the unrest that brings hundreds of merchants from Tehran's central bazaars into the streets.
And that flow is compelling. It is. But, I wonder if the connection as it's laid out right now risks missing the forest for the tree.
How so?
Well, the weakness is that we sort of jump from this generalized national inflation, which is, of course, devastating, to the very specific political action of the bazaar merchant.
A group that was traditionally loyal, or at least neutral.
Exactly. They're pragmatic. So the question is, how did the failure of Ayande, a bank run by regime affiliates, specifically translate into their loss of support? Why this event and not, all the years of sanctions or inflation before it?
That's a crucial distinction to make. We're talking about a group whose participation just fundamentally changes the nature of the protests.
It changes the entire risk profile.
Right. If we just chalk it up to 84% inflation, we kind of dilute the power of that finding. So what's the suggestion for tightening that up?
The suggestion is to strengthen that analytical bridge. We need to show the structural impact on the bazaar's livelihood, something beyond just generalized price hikes.
Okay.
We have to demonstrate why this $5 billion bailout specifically broke their trust. The listener, the writer here, has deep expertise, and they should really leverage it.
But just to push on that a little bit, wouldn't an 84% devaluation alone be enough to cripple any business? Are we risking overcomplicating things by looking for, say, credit lines?
I think it's necessary because it shifts the merchant's action from just, a passive response to shared suffering to an active response to a very specific structural betrayal.
Okay, I see.
The inflation hits everyone, sure, but the failure of a regime-affiliated bank suggests a targeted corruption that broke the actual backbone of their business model.
So for concrete examples, we could ask, did the bank's collapse directly impact their letters of credit?
Yes, exactly. Or their trade financing, the essential tools for their intricate import network.
Ah, okay. So if Ayande was a key issuer of the very financial instruments the bazaar relied on.
For their large-scale trade, yes.
Then its collapse due to cronyism isn't just an economic headache.
No, it's a failure of the specific system that was designed to help them. That's a fundamentally different mechanism than just being angry about the price of food.
It's a betrayal of the commercial class.
It's institutionalized sabotage. And if we can show that, the finding that hundreds of merchants join the protests becomes 10 times more powerful.
That makes the motivation much, much more robust. Okay, let's shift from that specific mechanism to the broader policy context.
Right. While the material lists several severe policy responses and economic pressures, I think synthesizing these into a single, accelerating narrative of government incapacitation will maximize the impact.
This is where we can really sharpen the moral force of the argument.
As it is now, the material points to the massive money printing, then the 2026 austerity budget, which is just brutal. Removing subsidies, hiking fuel costs, deleting the preferred exchange rate.
And then the government's response is, what, a $7 monthly cash grant?
A token gesture, yeah, one that barely covers bread and water, especially with a 72% jump in food prices.
It's a damning list of failures, but like you said, the way it's presented now, it can feel like just a list of discrete problems that happened one after another.
Right. The visceral connection is missing. The core weakness here is a missed opportunity to show the chain reaction.
The causality.
The causality, exact, to show how the corruption-driven decision bailing out Allende's $5 billion hole directly necessitated the crippling austerity measures that were later imposed on everyone else.
So it's not just bad policy, it's documenting a clear moral failing.
That's the key. The government's cronies create a massive debt. They finance it by gutting the currency.
And then they ask the general public to pay for the cleanup with austerity. The people pay twice.
Precisely. So the suggestion is to group these elements to really illustrate that compounded crisis. The narrative needs to show, first, the regime causes the crisis through cronyism. Second, they try to solve it by destroying the currency.
The 84% devaluation.
And then, third, they punish the general population for the cost of that cleanup with this incredibly harsh austerity.
And to make that compounding effect really hit home, we need to lean into the contrast of scale.
Absolutely.
The multi-billion-dollar cost of covering corrupt loans sitting right next to a $7 monthly grant.
That contrast is just staggering. And that's the analytical heart of this section. We need to explore the reality of that $7.
Right.
When food prices are up 72%, how many days does $7 keep a family fed? 1, maybe 2?
You contrast that tiny offering with the vast sums used to prop up their own affiliates.
And we should fold in the other crises too. The severe energy crisis, the power cuts, the gas shortages.
The shadow oil tankers.
All of it. These aren't just background noise. They are additional systemic pressures that show the government wasn't just failing on the financial front.
It was collapsing on multiple fronts at once.
Yes, when you take away subsidies while also imposing rolling blackouts, the message is clear. The state is incapacitated and it's choosing to download all the consequences onto its citizens.
That integration really does shift it. It's not accidental error anymore, it's calculated cruelty.
Forcing the reader to feel the true cost of that corruption.
Okay, that brings us to the last point, which is about leveraging the narrative devices the material has already put on the table.
This is my favorite part.
Maximizing the narrative contrast between high-level institutional waste and the consequences borne by the public will elevate this from an economic report to a powerful indictment of the regime's moral legitimacy.
And the material gives us the perfect tool for that. The analysis notes that over 90% of Ayande's resources were funneled into these proprietary, often failing projects.
Chief among them, Iran Mall,
which is explicitly called a symbol of extravagance.
Built with money that was supposed to stabilize the economy.
It's fascinating. And that symbol is a gold mine we are not fully exploiting yet.
Okay.
The weakness here is that the material establishes this incredibly powerful symbol, and then it just moves on to abstract financial numbers.
We go back to the $5 billion debt, the 84% devaluation.
Right. We spend too little time on the tangible, visual manifestation of the corruption that actually fueled the public rage.
So the suggestion is to use Iran Mall as a recurring narrative anchor?
Exactly. A touchstone. Bring the audience back to this physical representation of corruption, especially when you're talking about the poverty it created.
That's a powerful idea. You could visualize the contrast. On one hand, you have hundreds of thousands of square meters of luxury retail.
A temple to hyperconsumption.
And on the other hand, you have a 72% hike in food costs and a $7 stipend that won't even cover a week's worth of milk and bread.
The moral calculus is laid bare by the architecture itself.
So we frame the analysis around the idea of who the system serves.
Precisely. When you mention the failure of that $7 grant, you immediately juxtapose it with the institutional prioritization of a project like Iran Mall.
This contrast reinforces the central claim far better than just numbers could.
The claim that the banks were, quote, serving a small group of affiliates while harming the majority of the public.
You could even restructure a whole section around it.
I would. You could lead with the image of the mall as this monument to waste, then explore the financial collapse, and then slam the narrative home by concluding with the crushing austerity and that pathetic $7 handout.
Using this symbol to bookend the entire story of corruption.
It gives the argument such a potent emotional and intellectual resonance. It turns an economic report into a story about injustice.
Which is exactly what catalyzed the protests.
It is, as the material rightly notes. Adnan Mazaraei called this collapse a major breaking. That break wasn't just about bad macroeconomics. It was the realization that the hardship was a direct result of the elite's self-serving, extravagant behavior, epitomized by them all.
This has been a really focused critique. We've honed in on 3 key areas to sharpen what is already impressive work.
First, strengthening that direct causal link between the financial collapse and the bizarre merchants' mobilization.
Right, shifting from generalized inflation to the structural betrayal of their specific business ecosystem.
Second, synthesizing the financial and energy crises into a unified moral indictment of the regime's policy choices.
Showing that austerity was a direct punishment for cronyism, illustrated by that contradiction between the $5 billion bailout and the $7 grant.
And finally, leveraging that incredible narrative symbolism of extravagance.
Contrasting the spectacle of Iran Mall with the stark reality of the $7 survival grant.
The goal for all three is just to make the material even more robust and compelling. We're suggesting a focus on how those specific details, the mall, the grant, the merchants, can structurally reinforce the high-level conclusions about economic decay and the loss of legitimacy.
We invite you to implement these suggestions, and please, submit your revised analysis back to us. Until next time.